Real quick, before we get started, I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of this podcast, Greenlight.ai. We all know how important compliance is, and Greenlight.ai is the leader for compliance and EOR services, especially for talent platforms. You're going to hear about them later, but thank you to Greenlight. All right, Glenn, listen, this is almost 5 years in the making right now, by the way, because we
That's
first met
right.
about 5 years ago. Are you still in that same area of Miami as 5 years ago?
That's right. Yeah. I work right across from that restaurant where we had lunch. Yeah.
You lucky, lucky man. Well, listen, for you listeners out there, I'd say, actually, it's funny, Glenn, if you search human cloud, AllWork is one of the first thing that pops up right now, by the way. So
Nice.
so you've been driving what I would say is the technology-led conversation in this industry for, man, well over 5 years. And a couple things for you listeners to hear for is, number one, learn about, Glenn, how you've had to navigate the technology investment side of this. And so what technology do we actually invest in? There's a lot that has been invested in stuff that I would say is not as valuable. Two, really listen to how, Glenn, you've been able to adapt from an industry's perspective. So going from retail and hospitality to beauty and all these various ways, all the stuff that you've collected and then also can bring to other industries because of what you've learned. But the biggest thing that I want to kick this off with in terms of this theme is that we're going to be talking about reimagining the contingent workforce with three sub themes. First, what do we mean by contingent? Two, what do we mean by technology? Three, who is actually adopting this? So, first, give us a little spiel on yourself and AllWork, and then I got some questions for you, my friend.
All right. Excellent. So, yeah, I've been building technology companies for about 20 years, initially in the e-commerce space. And then I got interested in, I guess, what you would call the modern workforce. So I was running these tech companies, always hiring freelancers and consultants. And, every time I did it, it was like a one-off. So it was like, okay, where's the contract? How are we paying them? Are they invoicing us? And it was really messy and a lot of friction. And so it was sort of that understanding as a user myself, combined with just looking at the dynamics. And I was, living in New York City at the time, and I was very involved in sort of the startup ecosystem and how many people you would meet that were doing consulting. And it's not like gig work, but it's really like more like strategic consulting, freelancing on their part to build a practice, to start with themselves, build a practice, hire consultants, deliver great value to the companies who needed that flexibility. So it was kind of that convergence of me feeling the pain myself, but also looking at my friends and people I would meet in that startup tech ecosystem who were consulting for long periods of time.
Now, you are way past the startup game, though, in terms
That's
of
right.
You- so let me make sure you listeners know we will not be talking about the small businesses. We will be talking about the $1 billion plus budgets that are
That's right.
spending. The amount of money that is spent on talent and labor is insane. And to kind of also put a timestamp around us talking right now, Glenn. So for you listeners out there, it's October 29th. Today, this morning, we've heard about Amazon's 30,000 person layoff. We've heard about Target. We've heard about, there was one more company that I heard about this morning. So, I mean, we're sitting in a really weird time that there's a lot of change. And I know, and you know, that 5 years ago, we talked about, yep, this is the way the world should go. This is the way the world is going. But at the same time, why isn't it going faster? And I think now we're sitting this time of, oh yeah, we're going fast. This is the middle of it. So for you, help us understand when you say all work, help define it, but then also tell us about the customers and their problems that they're having.
Yeah, for sure. So the way we define all work is we help companies onboard, manage, and pay all types of contingent workers, and we do it in parentheses without the pain. And so we say it that way because if you ask somebody how they do this, they always say, "Ugh, it's so painful," right? And that word "painful" just comes across in every single sales call. And so we made that part of our motto, if you will, our positioning, which is like you said, the larger companies all use lots of contingent workers, and that could be a freelancer, a consultant, a contractor, whatever you happen to call it in your category, in your industry for that work type. But the idea is that when I started it, we said, okay, we want to be that one system of record, that one source of truth for all of your contingent labor spend. And it doesn't matter whether they're web designers, whether they're going into a retail store for promotions, whether they're IT consultants, it doesn't matter. That spend is not going through your core system. Let's say you use ADP or UKG. And that was the thing I noticed when I was running my tech companies is we started spending a lot of money, and everything we did with these contingent workers was outside of our core payroll system. So I say to HR, can you just use, ADP for that? Oh, no, we can't do that. So we're going to cut them a check. And everything was like manual and outside of our system. So you couldn't track it. People were spending money. You didn't know how much they were spending until it was too late. And so as the companies get larger and larger, they need more sophisticated budgeting tools, management tools. They need to understand the ROI on that spend. And so we always had that in mind, which is like one system of record, one source of truth, and the ability to have like real time information because essentially you have control over your data as opposed to it sitting like in a staffing company or payroll company or somewhere else. You have to kind of go get it or ask them for it. We wanted that data to be at your fingertips because it's your data. And so that's more of like a modern approach to technology as opposed to, well, I use these vendors, they send me reports. Maybe I aggregate the reports, maybe I don't. So it's really that idea of the data being central to everything.
Can we let's go back. Tell our listeners when AllWork started. Actually, tell our listeners when you started to care about this space, followed by when AllWork was started, followed by how things have changed. Because we both know it's changed, right? But
Right, right.
you've been on the front lines seeing this. So yeah.
So all work about started about 10 years ago. I had actually gotten interested in this space a couple years before that because I built a marketplace for executive coaches called Coach Market. So I had a executive coach myself. I met a lot of her friends who were coaches, and at the time there was no online way for them to get their message out to find customers. And so I built this marketplace, and I quickly realized that it didn't scale. Executive coaching is very, very individualized. It's very, very tricky to figure out how to make a match, and there was no AI back then, which would have helped, but still, I'm not sure it would really work. So I did that, and I said, okay, this isn't really working. But I noticed a lot of friction when I talked to the coaches, and one of the things they always said was, I don't get paid on time. Sometimes they don't get paid at all, right? So just getting them paid on time and paid accurately, wow, that was a huge thing if we could do that. And so as I started thinking about, my other experience as a tech CEO, I just said, let's look at where are all the freelancers, right? And we got started in the luxury brand space in New York, partly because we lived in New York. We were embedded in sort of the luxury brand world, the retail world. I had had some previous retail experience in consumer electronics. So I sort of understood the idea of creating experiences in stores, right? How are you going to beat Amazon? You're going to create an experience in the store they can't get on Amazon for product discovery, learning, engagement, and excitement, frankly. And so in that space with the luxury brands, they had a lot of freelancers. And at the time, a lot of them were paying them 1099 and they were getting sued left and right. And so, as you probably know, Matt, when you go up the scale from 1099 to W-2, the payment and compliance becomes infinitely more complex, right? And so that really worked in our favor because as those laws were changing, as the visibility increased, like, hey, I'm sorry, you're scheduling this person, you're training them, you're telling them what to wear, what to do. You can't pay them as a 1099 anymore. And if you do, you're taking massive risks. So we really built that into our software. So one of our key differentiators was we built compliance in from the moment you start onboarding until termination. And so this concept of really comprehensive layer of compliance in the software led us to create this idea that we wanted to have one platform. So today you have a lot of companies that do scheduling as a SaaS platform, and that's great. You have payments companies and payroll companies, and then you got to connect them. And then who's really responsible for compliance? Because each one's doing part of the compliance, if you will.
Yeah.
So the compliance layer, which is not often talked about, in our opinion, has to be integrated into every step of the process.
Hmm. Now a funny question that always pops up in my mind is like, okay, why hasn't the traditional talent industry changed and just done this? And to me, that's always mind-boggling because you look and, not to get too complicated, but you look and you're like, okay, there's these vendor management systems that are already in, 60% of enterprise spend. There's these MSPs that already have the relationships with the hiring managers and the companies. And then there's all these staffing firms. And you would assume, okay, if 37% of the US workforce started to become independent, then wouldn't the staffing firm just say, okay, here's an independent worker? But as you and I both know, it's not that simple. So, why do you think that we'll call it like the legacy full time, and I'm going to call it full time, meaning both internal and external, but why do you think this like legacy full time led industry? Why hasn't it been able to just shift to more of these flexible working conditions overnight? What's in their way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, from our view, what we see when we talk to customers is we ask them, how are they doing it today? How is
Yeah,
that going for them? And, they say, well, we have staffing companies that we work with either directly or through a MSP program, and they do the sourcing, but they're not really great at anything else. We have, maybe we have an EOR or payment platform integrated to MSP, but like it's kind of clunky because we find the people with a staffing company, that we send them over to them, and they got to coordinate all of that. And so I feel like the whole MSP VMS layering system is kind of the way I think of it, like all these
yeah,
layers, right? It disengages the hiring manager from the talent. I think that's one thing that we see, right? So the hiring manager says, I need 10 network ops guys for this new rollout,
yeah,
puts in a request, it goes through the MSP, VMS, staffing companies bid on it, he gets people. But they're not really the people he interviewed or selected. Um, to some degree, they're good. To some degree, they're bad. He may get surprised. It may impact his project success. And so, what we hear a lot is they want more direct control over sourcing. So, we have intentionally not built sourcing into our platform. The clients do the direct sourcing. And this excludes us from certain business where they want you to do the sourcing, and I get that. But the market is so huge that we see long term. I guess one of the things that we've discovered is that the long term success of contingent labor programs depends on the worker manager relationship, not worker HR, right? Worker manager. And are they set up for long-term success? Because typically we don't work with programs where it's like a 1 month, 2 month, 3 month assignment. They're like a year, 6 months to 18 to 24 months, sometimes even longer than that. And
yeah,
so that manager really has to have that sort of like relationship. And so that's the core to our structure is, we're not like a staffing company that we get in the middle of that.
yeah,
So the talent knows that they use the AllWork technology to check in, do their timesheets, do the reporting, do the invoicing, whatever they might do to talk to chat, use a mobile app to chat with their managers, to get schedules, all of that. But they don't think for a minute they work for us. They
yeah.
work for the customer. And so we take pains to make that really clear when we onboard the talent. Like, we're going to pay you, we're going to give you the technology to be successful, but you work for ABC company.
Yeah, which I mean, let's not act like everything is great. Like that's a lot of risk on you in terms of things like disintermediation. You're putting a
That's
lot of
right.
the right, you're putting a lot of the work on the hiring manager to be able to, do what they need. Now, this is where I'd say 5 years ago or 5 to 10 years ago when we were doing this, yeah, it was working in kind of fringe, extreme, innovative ways. And you'd have really good hiring managers, really good leaders who would go through the pain, but it wasn't enough to really bank a business on. And I would say you're banking a business on the fact that the manager or the executive, whoever they are, they want to have a direct relationship engagement with their, and I'll just call it talent strategy, right? And I mean, Glenn, that's a big from a culture perspective, that's a big leap to say, "Hey, project manager, hey, executive, talent is now a strategic focus for you." But I think it's true, and it's obviously what's starting to prove out. So let me ask you before I ask a couple other questions. What type of companies do you see yourself working with? What type of workers do you see yourself working with too? Because you mentioned like 6, 12, 18. these aren't gig workers, right? These aren't Uber
Mm.
drivers. So
That's right.
give us a little about the demographic of like what kind of companies you're working with and what kind of individuals on the contingent side.
Yeah, so on the what you would call sort of frontline or hourly workers, it would be sort of medium to higher skilled. So we don't work in like food service and hospitality where they tend to be, close to minimum wage with high turnover. Um, we work where there's a premium on the capabilities of that talent to deliver business results.
Huh.
Right? So you use this example, like I'm cleaning a hotel room at the Marriott. If I do it good, it's fine. No one really sees me. I don't really engage with the customers, and it's not a easy job at all, but it's kind of invisible in a way. For better or for worse, that's how it is. We tend to work with frontline workers where they're having a customer impact, they're doing sales or other things that really impact the company they're working for. They create that engagement. So there's more value added there. Hence, they make more money. Hence, they
Yeah.
stay longer. So all those things kind of work together.
Yeah.
And then as we're expanding, obviously, if you look at where a lot of the contingent spend is on
Yeah.
the SOW business, for example, a lot of in the SET, science, engineering, technology, where they're making a lot more money. They
Mm.
are, net ops engineers or developers or QA people. They're database engineers. They're all of the things that typically supplement these categories, and so the reason we're looking at those sort of higher level jobs is that's where the manager cares about the quality of the people the most because he's got a project to deliver. These are mission critical. So to your point, he is going to want to be more directly involved with them. The person who's managing the Marriott cleaning crew does not want to be intimately involved with those people. And so and your point is very correct, is we are looking for those, either we want to call it early adopters or people that already have said, I'm going to allocate time and energy to getting the best people, managing them closely because I'm looking to deliver business results that
Yeah.
are strategic to the company, no different than what the full-time employees have to deliver. And so that's kind of how we're focused in the market. Certainly, there's certain companies where they want to leave it all up to the MSP. They built that they want to let it run. That's not our customer, right? So we have some very large customers that use MSPs for certain parts of their business and not for others. And so, typically what I see with a lot of companies is that if they're enterprise, let's call them enterprise, they're going to have an MSP or multiple ones. They use them for certain types of jobs, certain types of functions, certain types of departments. But then other ones they don't use them because they don't work the way they want them to work. And so that's really what we're looking for in the market, is people that have that approach and say,
Yeah.
you know what I need? Like, I want to do it that way, but what I need is that underlying technology foundation so that I can onboard, manage, and pay them with technology, with custom built workflows, with great data. And that's what's missing in the market, in our opinion, is that our approach, which is we're going to do it all for you. We can customize the front end parts for you because our infrastructure is so robust. You're going to have all this great reporting. And guess what? We're going to really improve your engagement with these talent
Yeah.
because of all the technology, the mobile apps that they have. And so you're going to get more engagement, more connectivity. One of the modules we have is called Connected Worker because it's really
Yeah.
about connecting that worker to their managers, to their jobs, to their responsibilities. And something you asked earlier, which I think is a really important point, is that, one of the reasons I think where there's been sort of difficulty from companies' perspective in sourcing the right technology or even building it themselves is that this whole idea of how you manage the talent has been undefined. It's sort of like, oh, they're freelancers. You don't manage them. They just do their thing. And we all know that's not true. Like, no one just does their thing anymore, right? Like, you're in the company, you're in the projects, you're contributing value. How do you manage those people, keep them engaged? That's the part that we're very focused on because in the old days, paying contingent workers was really about just the payment, right? And if you remember, like 1099s, how do you pay them? Oh, you just send them a check.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
compliance, no tax taken out. They just take the tax out themselves, or they don't. It doesn't really matter to you. And so when you have that history, I think that history still lingers, right? Oh, contractors, that's easy. Just send them a check. They invoice you, send them a check. And obviously it's a lot more than that if you want to get strategic value.
Hey, everyone, real quick, I want to talk about the risk that is involved with an independent workforce. No matter where you are, whether it's the US, whether it's Brazil, whether it's the EU, whether it's London, there is risk in how you classify and how you work with individuals. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as just paying someone. The classification, the actual collaboration, the contracts, the payments, everything is intertwined and must be connected in a way that doesn't get you in trouble with the tax authorities, regulatory authorities, and even potentially class action lawsuits. There are numerous examples of this. Just search classification lawsuit and you'll get plenty. Which is why today's sponsor, Greenlight.ai, is the modern EOR, modern compliance solution for the modern workforce. There's four things that we want to call out when hiring an independent worker that you need. And that is you need to onboard, you need to classify, you need to send payments, and you need to manage this global workforce. It's more than just one person, and Greenlight has all of that covered. All right, I want you to head over to greenlight.ai and tell them Human Cloud sent you. So there's two themes. So I'm gonna ask you a very direct question, which is going to be we're going to talk about the who and then the how. But there's two themes I want to call out based off of words you were telling me. So first is you hit on this word invisible, which I think is very, very interesting. And part of what I'm hearing from you is that you guys might describe yourself as the invisible process for the visible worker, which this has massive parameters, Glenn, because part of when you look at like some of the traditional VMS MSPs, they're actually doing the exact opposite, right? They want to make sure that they are the visible ones and everyone knows, oh no, you can't go around whoever they are. But they're trying to make the worker invisible in terms of they just want a standard, repeatable process to make a lot of money, right? So that's one thing is, being the invisible to enable the visible. And I love that aspect of like, hey, the work getting done, it's the person that drives the success and not in a way of, I love the analogy of the cleaning, like not in the way of you see the end outcome, but you have to enjoy the process of getting there with that person. So I love that. A second theme though, is what you last hit on, which is it's no longer about the payment, it's about the process. Now, I'll give
That's
you
right.
my, first. So my kind of journey was in 2012. I was consulting, and what consulting meant is that I was playing baseball with a scholarship, so I couldn't have a full time job. So I would work on a contract basis. Now, what I would do is as we were driving from Boston to West Coast, because we would take the bus everywhere, I'd be doing my work, yada yada yada. Every 2 weeks, I would send the person what I did, and they
That's
would
right.
just PayPal me, right?
Right.
And
Right.
and so to me, like, so that was my intro in this. Now, and I just thought I was like, okay, that's that cute little like consulting thing I was doing before I got a
Mhm.
job. Then I got a job and I was like, oh my God, that consulting thing I was doing, I loved. I was making more of an impact. I was accountable to my outcomes. I was doing such better work for the end client. But to your point, there was no process. And now we're sitting in a place where, okay, teams are now going to be 10, 20, 30, 40% external and flexible. And that doesn't mean they're all W-2s or 1099s. It means that there's such a variance of what they should be. But to your point, the payment is no longer the hard part. It's
That's right.
literally like that's the easiest part there is. So with those two themes in mind, I mean, I'll leave you kind of if you want to hit on, addressing those, but also the next question I'm going to ask you is we're going to dive into the who of who you're seeing really drive this change. If it's VP of ops, if you're like, I really want to dive into who. So that's the question, but also feel free to hit on any of those two.
I have a great story about, what you just said about being paid with PayPal. So we were talking to one customer a couple years ago, and we referred to them actually by our law firm who said, "These people need some compliance help." And so, "Don't tell them I told you, but they need some compliance help." We're like, "Okay." Anyway, it was a pretty successful online marketplace for services. I don't wanna say which one, but
Yeah.
they were doing like 5 million a quarter in payments, and they were paying it all through PayPal.
I'm
And the
not
guy in
surprised.
accounting showed us his screen. He was manually entering into like this screen on PayPal, like $500 for Joe Smith, $400, and no compliance, no tax taken out, no real record keeping whatsoever. And I said, "Okay, guys, like, you can't do this." And so there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of that going on. And the other thing I noticed was if you remember when Upwork first started, it was Elance and
Yep. I know it is.
Odesk or something like that, they merged.
Yep.
And the original value prop was, we're gonna help you pay someone in Malaysia to do this, right? Or the Philippines,
Yeah.
right? Because there was no PayPal, there was no, you could not pay somebody in the Philippines. It was almost impossible. And so that was how they started off. And the problem was, after that became commoditized and accessible,
Yeah.
they couldn't add enough value around the other parts, which is now they're trying to get into that, right? With the enterprise
Yeah.
solutions, right? With the management of the teams, of the people. Because once you find the person in the Philippines on Upwork, you're like, I can just Venmo you and cut out the 10% or whatever,
Yeah.
right? So that's what we were seeing too. Is just like 10 years ago, everyone asked about payment, and now
Yeah.
they say, they ask these more holistic questions like, how does it work?
Mm.
What do you do? What do we do? What's the relationship between us and the freelancer and the contingent worker? They ask these more sort of holistic questions about, how is this work arrangement going to flow through your system? And
Yeah.
one of the reasons they ask that is, they may have been using a staffing company, and because of compliance rules, like the staffing company would say, as an example, you can't schedule them directly. You tell us what to do, and we'll schedule them, right? And that was very common 10 years ago, 8 years ago, not as much anymore, because companies like, "I don't want you in the middle of all this. It's impossible to do it." And a lot of times the staffing companies were literally getting emails and typing them into spreadsheets and sending them to the talent. So they weren't really happy about it either. But that's the biggest thing that we've seen, is the payment now is has to be done well and done right, but that's just a small part of the whole platform.
Yeah. No, I firmly agree. One of the interesting things that's changed so dramatically, that is a small detail, but is, I think, driving most of this impact, is when you were talking about like Elance and Odesk, right? It was actually mostly like cheap developers. And
Yeah,
so a
yeah,
Craigslist type experience was fine, right? So it's like an
right.
open job board and whatever. Okay. For the past, let's say up until 2020, pre-COVID, it was starting to get a little more like marketing-y and
Yep,
creative,
yep,
but it was still like individuals and IC work. So it still was that kind of, I don't want to say lower skill, but it wasn't what it is now. So now we're dealing with fractional, meaning executives coming in at 20 hours a week for forever. We're
right,
dealing with interim taking more of assessments. Okay, come quick turnarounds. We're dealing with literally people that could be head of product and head of marketing saying, no, actually, I want to stay this flexible thing. So the population of who is independent, whatever you want to call them, 1099s, freelancers, whatever, it's just a totally different segment. Have you been seeing that in the past 5 years as well?
yeah. And so what we saw was sort of this gradual build before COVID, and then it was like a hammer went down, right? And all these people moved out of New York, moved out of the big cities, went back to home, went to Vermont, went to Florida, whatever. And they still had these networks, let's say in New York, but they lived in Florida, and the cost of living is half as much, and they like the weather in the winter, and they want to stay there. And so the companies say, okay, great. We like John. We want to keep working with him. And we don't really care where he is right now, but we don't know how to pay people in Florida. And really, a better example is California, right? You're in New York or New Jersey. You got to figure out how to pay someone in California and not get in trouble. That's a big challenge. And so we saw this incredible acceleration after COVID, which has continued. And so, you do hear about things like, JP Morgan, everyone's coming back to work, and Amazon, and that is true for some of the very large companies. But we're not seeing that in a lot of what we call the normal enterprises. I
Yeah,
always call like the Amazons and JP Morgans like the super enterprise, right? Like
yeah,
they're Fortune 50, whatever. They're in that sort of different category. But as we're talking to a lot of them too, they have people in different states now. And they're saying, well, it's working, so let's keep doing it, but we're not in compliance. We don't really have that set up. And so, to your other question, who's the champion of this? Who's
yeah,
driving this? So, we see a lot of calls from compliance and HR people like, okay, they just told me now we're going to have 50 people in California, and I'm in Chicago, and I don't really know how to pay them properly. And some are 1099s. I'm not sure if that's okay. So where does that HR person go? Do they call their law firm? Unless the law firm is really a specialist at employment nationwide, they're not going to get a good answer. And they're going to get kind of like the worst case scenarios, right?
yeah,
So they come to someone like us and say, okay, we want to make sure we classify them properly. And we say, great, we can do 1099 or W-2, but we're not taking any chances on 1099s. And the
yeah,
world has changed if you haven't looked at it lately. Very few HR people outside of, let's say, you're a contingent workforce manager at a big company, if you already have that job, very few HR people that are generalists have any real background in how to classify people.
Yeah.
That is up to date. They generally understand the concept, but they don't know, like, this is the 21 test, right? Or, whatever it is. This is the ABC laws in California. Like, why would they keep up with that? So I think what we see is what you said, which is it used to be I went to Upwork to find a web developer to redo my website for $5,000, right?
Yeah.
But now what's happening is they're saying, no, I have 50 IT people that are doing things that are mission critical to me. And some of them are making, well into six figures. And they're going to work for me as long as they keep performing,
Yep.
because I don't want to have them as full-time employees for a variety of reasons. And then sometimes they do convert them, but a lot of times we're not seeing the conversions like we used to. It's like, they're freelancers, they're consultants for a long time.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think where we see that the drivers are HR when it comes to compliance, or someone has tasked them with paying a new type of worker and they're not quite sure how to do it. Also, the person that has the budget. So in the luxury brands like we work with, it could be the head of sales, right? So imagine you're head of sales for $1 billion brand and
Huh.
you're spending $20 million on freelancer talents to do store sales, events, merchandise. You have a big spend. That spend directly relates to your sales number that you're responsible for. So you're very interested in the performance of those people. And we tie our technology to help them drive performance and drive ROI. I think the biggest thing that we've seen in the last 5 years post-COVID or for whatever it is for is, okay, in the past, it was like, I'm going to have some freelancers, some consultants just because we do. Now it's like, I'm going to have those, but I'm going to look at these new workforce opportunities and figure out, is there a better ROI on having them be flexible? So those are more strategic decisions as opposed to in the past. It was like, yeah, we have some consultants, but it's no big deal. Now it's like, well, we're thinking about shifting this entire function to a freelance flexible workforce. Let's do the numbers. Let's figure out if it makes sense. And so that's why we always talk about driving business results as
Yeah.
opposed to just saying, we pay people on time.
So I'm like, I'm a very visual person. So for me, I'm like, okay, how do I visualize this? And part of what you're hitting on, which we've definitely seen as well, is yeah, so, like, it's always been, "Okay, full-time," and then just throw over the fence, that other
Right.
side, which is my contractors or my staffing firm. And the throw over the fence, I'll never forget, I was literally, when I was in San Francisco at Gigster, it was like we were doing $10 million custom software builds through this flexible network. It was so cool. And then I went to Microsoft, and I thought I was such hot shit coming from San Francisco, and then they were like, "Oh, $10 million? Ugh, that is so tiny." But
Right.
then, you know who
Right.
would show up? Procurement, and I remember being like, "Procurement? What the hell is procurement?" And this is gonna sound so dumb, Glenn, so I'm gonna show how dumb I am. But I remember I had just watched, Crazy Rich Asians, and there was this scene where they hit the gong, and they said something like, "Oh, I'm the procurement lead of this family," and I was like, "Oh, you just literally procure things?" And it was so foreign to me. And then I remember talking with our procurement lead at Microsoft and be like, why are you guys like, why is talent and procuring paper clips in the same sentence? Like, these are 2 totally different
Yes.
functions, you
Yes.
know? So, part of what you're hitting on is like, hey, there's this middle ground now, which is it might be a team of full-time employees, it might be a team of contractors, but what matters is that flexibility, and where AllWork, where you guys come in, is the flexibility does not mean 1099. Like, the flexibility means the ability to go, "We need to get this work done. What's the best way to do it?" And these individuals, we can't like, they might not be on our books, or even if they are, we have a partner like you who can help us go up and down based off
That's
of
right.
the market needs. So tell us about some big wins. Like, I think, to summarize where we've come from now, you started in luxury. You really, really, really saw the increase of strategic sourcing with this independent workforce. You're sitting in a place now where you have these Fortune 500s and you're basically enabling HR to be able to catch the 50 IT people that the business team is saying, you better not have us lose them. But tell us about some of the big wins, excite us about what to expect coming up. Yeah, man, this is your time
Yeah.
to brag.
Yeah. So one of the wins that we had was a large luxury brand, Fortune 100 company, um, had a payroll system like a, ADP, UKG kind of system. and they were trying to use it for their freelancers, what they call freelancers, which are in-store salespeople, support, events, merchandising. And so we got contacted by the head of HR after we had talked to the salespeople essentially and said, we have this great workforce management software. And then HR came at it and said, well, do you guys also pay them and do compliance? But we have a lot of problems with that.
Mm.
And I'll tell you what the root of the problem was. They said, okay, we have this really large multi-billion-dollar platform that we've invested in for our full-time salaried knowledge workers, or white collar workers, if you will.
Yep.
And then we tried to use it for these hourly workers essentially who are working between 0 and 30 hours a week. And it totally varies with the season and events and all of that. And, they would get people deactivated on their platform because they didn't work in a month. They had to pay upkeep fees. They were getting emails from managers in the field and emailing social security numbers. And they were doing all that and then manually entering it into the system because there was no automated onboard process for these workers because they needed a different onboarding process. So, I mean, her list of pains were so huge. I was like, oh my God, I'm in heaven. Like, we're going to solve all of those.
Where do we start?
And, and so it was really like unbelievable because, they're like, well, we've looked around for a couple of years and we didn't know about you. Then we heard about you through somebody else and blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. But like, they just could not find a platform to do what they wanted it to do, which was keep this workforce separate as an EOR, have workforce management technology that was really based on shift by shift for this flexible workforce. So we sort of checked all the boxes. We won that account, we implemented them. And it was just like, for them, it was like just sunshine coming into a dark room essentially.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest things that I remember was the woman in HR after we did sort of a 90-day postmortem on the launch and how's it going and all that. She said, guys, I love you. I have my weekends back. I was spending all weekend typing these people into our system just to get them paid on time. And my husband is the happiest person in the world because we see each other on weekends. And that felt so great. But I was like, why did you suffer for so long? But a lot of people are because it's not easy necessarily to find us or someone like us that has the right fit for you in a world, as you know, of like you go to HR tech and there's 500 vendors, right? And what do they all do and what's right for me? And I think one of the things that we like to think about is that we try to be as agile as our customers are trying to be. So they're saying, I need flexibility to do these 10 things. And we're like, yes, we're going to help you get that flexibility. And so, it's a really nice business from that perspective because it's win-win. And so now what we're doing, now that we have the enterprise experience and we're saying, okay, you would think some of these enterprises have 2 problems to solve, but they have 25 because it's so complex, it's so large. They can't get away with manual processes, especially with the distributed workforces like all over the country.
Yeah.
And so now as we look forward, what we're really excited about is taking what we've learned and focusing on what I would call the broader contingent workforce, in particular these SOW workers that are working on projects, again, like 6 to 24 months, doing
Yeah.
IT engineering, et cetera, where they're very valuable. And the one thing we didn't talk about is when we started this, we always had this idea that even though we're paid by our customers, right, not by the talent, we want to focus on the talent experience because we kept hearing from talent, I love you guys. I get paid on time. Everything on my app is visible. I can switch to Spanish in the app. Like you really take care of me. Right. And so we always thought like if the talent, if the contingent workers are happy, they're going to stay longer, which is better for our customers. And so that was one of the, I would say, complaints we heard in the beginning about contingent workforces. Oh, you hire these people, you kind of get them up to speed and then they just quit because they're going to go on to a full-time job. And that's changing when they don't go on to a full-time. They may do a contingent workforce job for 5 years and be very happy with it. And so we're really also focused on that talent experience, getting rid of that friction. And I mean, you've probably seen the surveys, like 70% of freelancers say they don't get paid on time and 20% they don't get paid ever. Um, like that's just not acceptable.
So there's one of the toughest parts I would say in my in this industry is that every 30 days it feels like someone will tell me something as if it's a fact, and I will just look up and be like, why do you believe that? Because it's so foreign to me, and like and the number one thing that to me I just always look up and I'm just like, I don't even know where to start to try to tell you you're wrong because this is just a blatant fact. Like to me, this is the thing I want to say is a the world is flat type thing to say,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So to
yeah,
me, the world is flat equivalent is the whole concept of temp to hire. Why in the like that maybe that made sense for the past 50 years.
yeah.
In my case of knowing the actual flexible workforce and the people that are working for themselves, freelancers, whatever we want to call it, they don't do it because they want a job. They do it because they like working in this flexible manner better, and
That's
that
right.
doesn't mean they won't go full time. They might do it, but it's not because there's a temp to hire relationship set up. They're doing it because maybe they need to work so much that it's hitting 60 to 80 hours, or maybe they need access to certain systems. But this whole concept of temp to hire, Glenn, it drives me nuts because I'm just like, that is world is flat type material for me. That's just not true when you look at the best talent.
No, and I think that's been, you asked before about this sort of legacy of like, why has it been so hard to create this kind of technology and revolutionize the industry? And there are these embedded things, and that's one of them, which is you hire a temp only for 4 weeks to fill in when your assistant is gone, right? Right. And this is like so 30 years ago. Or you hire them to try before you buy. And we see almost none of that now. In the higher level skill sets, you see almost none of that. And I think it's this legacy where in the old days, if you wanted a temp, you used Kelly or you used a staffing company or Manpower, and that's the way they sold it. It was like, okay, you know what? You want to hire this person temporarily to see if you like them. Here's the buyout deal. And the economics were all built around that.
And it made sense when it was hard to work for yourself, or it made
That's
sense
right.
when working
There
for
was no
yourself meant
laptops, there was no internet, like, you had to be in the office, right, to work and accomplish.
which so let me I'm gonna tease something, okay? So for you listeners out there, Glenn, you're not allowed to answer this question. The reason is because, I want these listeners to reach out to you individually. So, we have not talked about a big buzzword, but I'll give you, to me, what is maybe the equivalent, of what's gonna happen because of this big buzzword. So, I will tell you that we are sitting here and you telling me there's these embedded legacy systems and processes that have created so much friction, so much pain. And one of those is the temp to hire. Now, I grew up in a generation that I had laptops in college. And so the idea of being able to work remotely, collaboratively, like hell, even the concept, this is going to sound so bad, Glenn, but I freak out when someone sends me back and forth Microsoft Word documents because that just makes no sense. We have Google Docs. We can work,
Right.
right? But that's so there's this like so I'm sitting, I would say, in what I thought was the newer wave of okay, like temp to hire doesn't make sense because it's easy to not work for yourself. Now, I will say in the past 6 months and definitely in the past 60 days, we have experienced the next sort of transformational leap, which is AI. And I hate myself for saying the word, but the amount of things that we can do that no longer require developers and instead just require having the right person, which all comes back to one of the first things you told me. You are the invisible process to get to the visible people. So I'm going to throw out a crazy thing and say that in the era of AI, visibility of who you're working with is way more important than skill sets and any of those things. Now, intentionally, Glenn, you're not allowed to answer that because listeners, I want you to go reach out to Glenn immediately. And so your last question, Glenn, is where can our listeners find you and AllWork?
Yeah, you can go to allworknow.com and there's a form there. You can request a demo and I will see that. Or you can email info@allworknow.com.
I love it. Glenn, thank you for hopping on, my friend.
Great to reconnect. Thank you, Matt.